Okay, so before we continue our journey here today, let's take a look at where we have come. We began with cosmology, and in cosmology we found that the universe does not look billions of years old, it looks much younger. And because of that, all of the stuff above it cannot happen. You can't get the origin of life from non-life if you don't have billions of years to work with. Even so, we said, let's pretend you've got billions of years. Can you still get life forming from non-life? And of course, the answer to that question was no. Doesn't matter how long you have, you need life. Keep it down a little bit, folks. You need life in order to get life. Genetics and DNA, we found the human genome is going down, not up. So that's the opposite of what evolution would require. And when we looked at natural selection in the previous section, we found that this process, even if you start with something that's alive and can replicate and can, have offspring, natural selection cannot get you the variety of creatures that we see in our world today. And so what we're going to take a look at next is going to be the fossil record. And I must have to press the button here. And we will change the background. So what we've done is we've looked at the foundation of naturalism. Again, these are the foundational steps that have to be in place for a worldview with no God or no creator to have some validity to it. But what we found is that when we shine the light of truth on these foundational steps, they crumble before our very eyes. Even so, now that we're done with these steps here, we're going to take a look at the actual physical evidence. Okay, so we're going to start with the fossil record today. These are actual fossils and bones of animals that we can hold in our hands and look at right in front of us. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the fossil record. Let's see what it has to say. Thank you. Anybody know what the background is here? What this is?
Red sand.
It is a fossil. It is red sand. If you look close, you can see there's something in that red sand.
Looks like a rib cage or centipede.
Nope, you're kind of close on a centipede. It's got a lot of legs.
Oh, I feel like I know what it looks like, but I can't think of it.
It starts with the letter T, and it is the official fossil of the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah, okay.
What was it? Trilobites. Yep.
They're like literally look like little roly-polies kind of, right?
Right, yeah. They're kind of creepy things, yeah.
States have official fossils?
Yes, they do. I did not know this until I looked it up for myself, but yeah, Wisconsin's official fossil is the trilobite. And the person that we are going to be hearing from a lot of times, if you don't see something that's credited with a quote, it comes from this individual, Dr. Emil Silvestru, and he is Romanian and did a lot of really good science work in topography and geology, especially in caves. So he is very qualified to speak on this topic. So here's the thing. If the biological diversity of life today is the result of nearly 4 billion years of descent with modification through natural selection, the fossil record should provide the ultimate evidence for it. It turns out that one can hardly find a more factual example for the weaknesses of such a naturalistic worldview, making the fossil record an extraordinary problem for evolution. Darwin knew it, and modern paleontologists know it. So again, when we're looking at how everything supposedly got here, it's through this process of, the general theory of evolution. You begin with a simple cell, which branches off into something else, and then, further down it branches off into something else, and it continually branches into new animals. So again, it's not like, humans branched off from a chimp. Humans and chimps branched off from a common monkey ancestor, supposedly, that we originally came from. And that's how the story of evolution goes. Now, if the fossil record is something that shows evidence of this grand story of evolution, we ought to be finding transitions between these big different kinds of animals throughout the fossil record. When we're digging up these fossils, everything we find should be a transitional fossil. It should be a creature kind of in the process of turning into something else. But when we look at the fossil record, as mentioned, that's not what we see. So transitional fossils are fossils that link consecutive evolutionary stages. Over these billions of years, we should see lots and lots of changes adding up to these ultimately brand new animals. If this theory is true, the fossil record should show tons and tons of evidence of this. However, Darwin, in his frustration, knew at his point in time that these transitions were not found. And this is a quote from him. He says, "Why, if species have descended from other species by insensibly fine gradations, do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? And I will here only state that I believe the answer mainly lies in the record being incomparably less perfect than is generally supposed." Well, they had millions of fossils back then. And today, we have trillions of fossils. So it was kind of a stretch to kind of, say this is the reason we don't see transitional forms in the fossil record back then. But today, with trillions of fossils, hundreds of years later, this is no longer a valid excuse. There are too many fossils in the fossil record to jump back to this. So what do we find in the fossil record? What would we expect to see if we believe the biblical version of history is true? Well, we would expect creatures to appear and disappear suddenly. After all, they were all created during the creation week. So we would expect them to just kind of appear in the fossil record without having precursors to these, complex forms. We would expect to see all major taxa of animals being present just before the flood, existing as basic kinds, kind of what we just mentioned there. Their vertical order in the fossil record should reflect their habitat and flooding dynamics. Because if Noah's flood is true, then Noah's flood would be responsible for laying down this fossil record, along with the geologic record that we find these fossils in. So the order in which we're finding these creatures should match up with where they lived and the order in which they would have been buried in the flood. Because if they existed primarily near the ocean, then they would be buried first. Because as the waters came up onto the land, you'd bury those, coastal creatures first. The further inland you go, you'd find animals that should be further up in the fossil record because they would have been buried last. In addition, you can think of it in terms of just overall smartness and ability to outrun these floodwaters for a longer period of time. You would expect to see larger, more complicated, faster creatures higher up in the fossil record if they're able to escape these floodwaters for a longer period of time. And a majority of fossils should be of marine organisms. And this is something that we kind of forget. If Noah's flood actually happened, which it did, we would expect to see in the fossil record all sorts of fish being fossilized. Because, they're existing in the water, but in that water, it wasn't just a calm, washing up and coming back off the shore here for Noah's flood. There were massive amounts of sediment and mud and all sorts of things that were overwhelming these creatures. It wasn't just, water. And fish were not immune from the flood and its effects. They were covered, they were fossilized, just like land animals were. It almost appears that the fossil record has been turned today into an icon, a sacred image that is worshipped by a crowd of disciplined followers. Like all icons, the fossil record is fiercely protected so that no paleontological fact can blemish its fine, triumphant progression through time. It has gotten to the point that paleontologists often dictate where a fossil should be in that progression, and if it's found elsewhere, it's firmly explained away. All new and challenging fossil finds are shoehorned to fit the icon, while the ones that seem to confirm the paradigm are triumphantly popularized. And this is a quote from our friend Richard Dawkins. I'd like you to write down the quote. You don't have to necessarily put down who it's by, but go ahead and write that bullet point quote down, please. So when he says Precambrian, these are rocks that were supposedly laid down before what's known as the Cambrian explosion, where all sorts of different animals just sort of suddenly appear in the fossil record with no precursors. So he's saying if there was a single hippo or rabbit found in these Precambrian rocks, rocks that date from pre-500 million years ago, that would completely blow evolution out of the water. None have ever been found. And you know what? He's right to an extent. We have not found hippos or rabbits in Precambrian rock, but we've found other examples that are even worse than that. We've found evidence of things that fossils are in the wrong place by more than just 500 million years off, and you'll see some of these examples shortly. Go ahead and write down the first sentence here, please. Kind of as a response to that quote. Just the first sentence. So you're going to cut it off right at concerned. So of course, if you Google, creatures and when they first appeared on this earth, whether it's a trilobite or a scorpion or a snake or something like that, it will tell you when they first kind of appeared, whether it's 60 million years ago or 500 million years ago or 300 million years ago. And here's the thing. So Darwin's Tree of Life supposedly has a timeline that goes along with it. So these creatures supposedly developed at certain periods of time in the usually hundreds of millions of years ago past. Now, if we find fossils in rock layers that date from the wrong period of time when they supposedly developed, like if scorpions, I'm sure this isn't true, but if the general knowledge is scorpions evolved 300 million years ago, and then we find a scorpion from 500 million years ago, according to our dating methods, that would throw a huge wrench in the theory of evolution and how these scorpions got here. And if finding these out-of-place fossils were to destroy the grand theory of evolution, then it would have been proven wrong millions of times over. We have found so many fossils that are out of place in terms of their date on when they supposedly came about that, it's almost routine to find them. Hippos and rabbits may not have been found in the Precambrian, but similar fossils have been found as far as their evolutionary significance is concerned. Did they blow evolution out of the water? No, because evolution is a worldview. It is used to interpret all the evidence, no matter what is found. It can't be falsified by a fossil find. The fossil is simply reinterpreted to make it look like it proved evolution all along. So this timeline is very fuzzy, and it's always moving back and forth. Sometimes it's easy to move it. sometimes we encounter animals that just can't be reconciled with the theory altogether. I'm just going to show you a few examples here. You're going to have to write all this down.
Fossils.
Yep. When we're talking about these fossils that are found in the wrong place in the fossil record, they're off by hundreds of millions of years. We call these offset fossils. So when we're looking at these fossils here, I want to make sure that we're kind of visualizing how far off we're talking, because we can talk about 500 million years ago and 50 million years ago all day long. Your eyes kind of glaze over because it's impossible to really comprehend that period of time from our perspective. So what we find here is these rocks in the Salt Range Formation in Pakistan were dated as being Cambrian, roughly 500 million years ago. And then within those rocks, they're finding fossils that supposedly didn't come about until 450 million years later. Flowering plants, non-flowering plants, insects with composite eyes. And so just to give you an idea of how far off this is again, folks at home won't be able to see this if they're watching it, but for your benefit. So this is the present here, all right? This would be like 5 million years ago. So this is how long ago we shared a common ancestor with chimps. So this is where we supposedly were still monkey-type people. So then 50 million years ago might be right there. 500 million years ago is right here. So they thought these fossils should be 500 million years old, but when they saw what they found, they're actually off by 450 million years. So this is a huge period of time here. This is not like a drop in the pond. This is an enormous period of time that these fossils have been found to be completely off. So because of this, they were like, oh, so we're going to redate this rock formation then as being 50 million years old. And then they realized there's just no way to reconcile those two things. So they said, okay, well, we're just going to redate it back to the original Precambrian rocks, and we just aren't sure how that all works then. And if you could add up all of the cases like this, where there's just no explanation for how these fossils are so far off, you'd be buried in the number of cases that you'd find. I've got two more I'd like to point out, though, for you here today, though. From this slide, go ahead and write down everything up to the quote, okay? So everything down to the quote. This is really fun. How many people here have seen the movie Up? Okay, yeah, that's a fun movie. So this is Angel Falls right here, if you remember from that movie.
It's like the house by the falls.
That would be cool. It's kind of interesting. Over the years when I always ask that question when I get to this slide, but over the years it seems like still a majority of people have seen that movie, even though you guys were like 1 or 2 when it came out probably. So for this one at Angel Falls, this rock formation was dated as being 1.8 billion years old. Then they found pollen. And if you know anything about when pollen supposedly arrived on the Earth, it hadn't gotten here until about 350 million years old. So again, there's no way for us to really comprehend these years. But just to give you an idea of how far off that is, 1.8 billion years compared with 360 million. So pollen supposedly came about here. All right, this is when it evolved. Meanwhile, we're finding it in rocks from 2 billion years ago. So let's see, this is 500. 1 billion years would be about here. And 2 billion would probably be beyond that wall there. Okay? That's how far off these fossils are. And that's why this guy says we offer no solution to the paradox, and this remains a highly intriguing problem. Folks, the reason they're not offering any solutions is because there aren't any valid solutions that make any sense. These millions and billions of years are fiction. It makes sense that in a catastrophic flood, you would have different things eventually find their way into rock layers that they wouldn't be in from a naturalistic worldview. That's why we see what we see. It makes sense from a biblical perspective that you would have an imperfect burial of these things. I mean, yeah, we could see a general ordering of animals like we talked about a few minutes ago, but there will be exceptions to that. That's what catastrophic worldwide floods would do. It's exactly what we would expect. One more for you here, and this might arguably be the most important. Write it all down. Good thing we're doing this before spring break, right? Bless you. So this is the Ediacara vertebrae, and it's dated by geologists as being Precambrian. And that phrase is one of those like head explode kind of phrases. Because Precambrian rocks are like the earliest rocks that we find here, way before any like big animals came along. You only had like supposedly cellular life in these Precambrian rocks from more than 500 million years ago. And yet inside these rocks we're finding fully formed animals with backbones. This cannot be from a naturalistic worldview. This cannot be if Darwin's theory of evolution is true. Because so maybe you say, okay, we'll take these vertebrae, these animals with backbones, and we'll say that, you know, they came into existence more than 500 million years ago. And you can do that. You can push that timeline back. But it comes at an expense. And that expense is the fact that you're pushing further back into the past where all these more primitive animals came into existence. These animals that did not have backbones, that are supposedly less evolved than vertebrates. In the same way, you can't keep pushing the problem of the origin of life back in time due to aliens. You can't keep pushing the arrival of vertebrates back in the past, because you're not leaving enough reasonable time for the pre-vertebrates to have come about through a process of evolution. And that's basically what you wrote down here in a few more words. It originally created a stir, now it's ignored, because once again, there's no reasonable way to solve this problem from a naturalistic perspective. Write this down too. Not as many words there. What's that?
I thought you said that was the last thing.
I thought it was going to be, but we got through it in pretty good time here. And this one will be a fun way to close out the class today. So this is an appropriate time to talk about what it takes for an animal to become fossilized. In order for a land animal to be fossilized, it has to be quickly overwhelmed with both water and sediment. It has to be overwhelmed with sediment so that no scavenging occurs, because if you've got scavengers there, eventually over a period of time you won't even have any bones left to fossilize. It also must be covered with water, because it's the minerals from the water that permineralize that bone and turn it into a fossil. So both of those things have to happen extremely fast after that animal dies. And when we look at a map of where we see land animals fossilized all over the world, what you realize is that the only way to really get these animals fossilized is to have flood-like conditions at these locations. Again, they have to be quickly covered with water and sediment, very soon after death, or perhaps the flood causes their death. So what we have to believe from a naturalistic perspective is there was a localized flood here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here, 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 way up there, here, 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 here. And that's why we find all these land animals fossilized all over the globe. When a much more reasonable explanation would be the fact that this whole world was covered by a worldwide global flood. And that's why we see these land animals fossilized all over the world. Not because there were individual floods at all these locations over the world. And by the way, this is not all land animals here. This is just where we find dinosaurs fossilized. If we pointed out where land animals, all land animals were found fossilized, then you would see this entire map being red. So once again, what's a better explanation? That there were localized floods at every single location on Earth? Or that there was one massive watery catastrophe that laid down this fossil record all at the same time?